Welcome to TOCHI Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now, let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The walls of the prison were not built for redemption. They were built for forgetting. Adana Arowania stood still, clutching her worn brown handbag as a warden led her down the long hallway, past thick bars and thicker silence. The air smelled like rusted metal and despair. The fluorescent lights flickered above like they, too, were tired of bearing witness. She had been in courtrooms, police stations, even underground offices for wrongly accused clients. But this was different. The man she was coming to see wasn't some local driver or petty trader. He was Darian Okonkwo, the once golden name behind Okonkwo Holdings, a company that built estates across 3 continents. Now, his name was a curse. Accused of rape, attempted murder, corporate theft, and domestic abuse, the media had devoured his story until all that was left was a pile of disgrace. And yet, she had agreed to come here. Not because she believed he was innocent. Not because she was ambitious. But because the request came from a quiet letter written in pencil, one line. If justice is a dying flame, let me be ash in your hands. He sat across the bulletproof glass, like a shadow of a man. His once pristine hair was cropped close to the scalp, his beard overgrown and peppered with gray. His orange prison uniform didn't sit on him. It clung like shame. But what startled Adana most wasn't his appearance. It was his silence. He didn't speak as she introduced herself, didn't flinch when she laid out the charges and what her legal strategy might be. He just stared at her with hollow eyes that looked like they had seen something worse than betrayal. Something like betrayal wearing the face of love. You don't know what you're walking into, he finally said, his voice gravelly and hollow. Even I didn't see it coming. And I was married to her. Adana blinked. She had reviewed Chioma Okonkwo's tearful interviews. The world saw her as a wounded woman standing bravely after years of torture. But Darian's face didn't carry rage. It carried grief. Not of a man angry to be wronged, but of one mourning a love that buried him alive. Adana didn't know if he was innocent yet, but she knew one thing. She needed to find out. Outside, the rain began to fall. Not the loud kind that made noise on rooftops, but the quiet kind that blurred windshields and soaked slowly through coats. As she walked to her Kiki parked by the prison gate, her phone buzzed. It was her friend, Kamsi, another lawyer in their low-budget firm. "You're really going through with this?" Kamsi asked. "You'll be ruined. He's guilty. He's toxic. And he's not even paying." Adana paused, staring at the gray skies above. "Maybe," she replied, her voice low. "But so was my father. And no one fought for him." She hung up before she could explain. Before she could describe the look on Darian's face. Before she could admit, even to herself, that something in her had shifted in that visitation room. It wasn't logic. It wasn't ambition. It was something more dangerous. Something like purpose. The court was a cold, tiled hall that echoed every insult hurled her way. The day Adana filed her motion to request review of Darian Okonkwo's conviction, the entire legal floor rippled like a pond hit by a rock. Men in navy suits laughed behind her back. Some were less discreet. "She's using him to trend on social media," a senior lawyer scoffed. "Just another hungry girl looking for fame." Others whispered more cruelly, saying she probably slept with him, or that she was just desperate for relevance in a system that chewed up poor lawyers like meat. But Adana walked on, ignoring them all, her head lifted higher than it had any right to be. Every step reminded her of her father, Justice Arowania, a small-town magistrate who was framed for bribery and died in prison before his name was cleared. She had been 17, and the law had been her monster ever since. Adana remembered those nights vividly. Her mother washing her father's prison clothes and praying through tears. The neighborhood kids whispering when she walked past. The silence in their home after the verdict. That verdict had killed more than her father. It had killed her mother's laughter, their family's dignity, and her belief in fairness. But somehow, from that ash, Adana rose. She had devoured law books like medicine, slept through hunger just to finish exams, opened a practice with Kamsi in a leaky two-room office above a mechanic shop in Yaba. She wasn't chasing fame. She was chasing justice that once ran from her. So now, as the same system aimed to bury Darian Okonkwo alive, she saw echoes of her father. Even if Darian was guilty, she'd make sure no lie would bury the truth. Not again. That night, after submitting her appeal application, she sat by her mother's bedside, spoon-feeding her pap and groundnut paste. Her mother's diabetes had worsened, and they could barely afford her medication. "This case," her mother said, voice cracking, "you think he's innocent?" Adana paused, brushing her mother's frail hair back. "I don't know," she whispered. "But something tells me he was loved by the wrong woman, and it destroyed him." Her mother's eyes, clouded with fatigue and time, blinked slowly. "Then love must be the most dangerous weapon," she said. Adana nodded, her heart heavy, because deep down she already suspected that it was true. Chioma Okonkwo wore white. That wasn't unusual. Widows wore white in mourning. Saints were painted in white in church murals. And on television screens across Nigeria, Chioma wore white as she cried. She sat for an exclusive interview with Africa Watch, a popular media platform known for scandal and sensation. The host leaned in close as Chioma dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, painted nails trembling. "I endured," she said softly, "for years. The beatings, the threats, the nights he came home drunk and dangerous." The world gasped. Twitter exploded. Instagram reposted it 1,000,000 times. And, as Adana watched from her small office, the video playing over the background hum of a fan, she felt something off. It wasn't that she didn't believe women could be abused. She had defended many. It wasn't even the tears or the story. It was the timing. Chioma had waited until Darian was officially sentenced, his empire in ruins, before stepping out. And the emotion, it felt rehearsed, almost poetic. Her pauses were too perfect, the shudder in her voice too rhythmic. "He took everything from me," Chioma whispered into the camera. "My peace, my safety, my womanhood. And yet I stayed, because I loved him." Adana's chest tightened, not because she believed Chioma, but because she remembered what it felt like to love someone and be punished for it. Still, her gut screamed that something here didn't align. The victimhood felt tailored. Later that evening, she watched the full video again, this time frame by frame. And there it was, a split second when Chioma's mask cracked, when the camera panned too slowly, catching her eyes before the tears came. They were cold, calculated. And then, as if she remembered she was being filmed, her lips quivered again. But Adana saw it now. Chioma wasn't mourning. She was performing. And suddenly, a memory of Darian's hollow voice rang again in her ears. "Even I didn't see it coming. And I was married to her." Adana leaned back in her chair, spine tingling. If Chioma could lie to the entire nation on camera, what else had she lied about under oath? Adana's feet crunched against broken glass as she stepped into what used to be the headquarters of Okonkwo Holdings. The once mighty building, a towering glass and steel edifice in Victoria Island, now bore scars of abandonment, cracked marble tiles, flickering lights, and a reception desk stripped of its company crest. A tired-looking receptionist, now working for a Bina Group, barely looked up as Adana asked to see the archives. "We don't keep anything from his era," the woman said, almost spitting the word. "Obinna is the new blood. He's cleaned up the rot." The word stung. The same Obinna Ojukwu, who was once Darian's childhood friend, business partner, and most trusted confidant, had now taken over every company Darian built from the ground up. Adana walked through the office floors, noting new plaques on doors, new staff with unfamiliar names. But it wasn't the transformation that disturbed her. It was the whispers. She passed two janitors talking near a window. "I heard she used to spend nights in Obinna's office before the arrest," one said, "even when Oga was around." The other laughed. He was building an empire. They were tearing his life apart behind his back. Adana's fists clenched. The betrayal wasn't just marital, it was surgical, planned, corporate treason disguised as emotional trauma. She managed to speak to 3 former employees, all off the record, all terrified. One of them, a former secretary named Bidemi, agreed to meet her in a bar that night, far from the glittering towers of Lagos. Her eyes were darting, as if someone was following her. We all knew something was off, Bidemi confessed. The night before the police came, Chioma called the internal finance team and changed all the passwords. Darian didn't even know. She took a deep breath, lowering her voice. And Obinna, he had a duplicate of Darian's master keys. He walked into his office the day after his arrest, like he already owned the place. That was when Adana knew this wasn't just a domestic abuse case. This was an orchestrated coup. The charges were merely the mask. Someone had puppeteered Darian's fall to take everything from him. His name, his legacy, his worth. And worst of all, he had handed it over willingly, blinded by trust. Adana left the bar that night shaken, her stomach twisting. She had expected lies. She hadn't expected them to run this deep. Back in her office, she laid out a board of photos, Chioma, Obinna, the date of the arrest, the press conference, the stock ownership transfers, and the hidden timeline no one seemed to care about. Her legal assistant, a quiet young man named Defani, stared at the board. "Ma, this feels like more than a case." Adana didn't look up. "Because it is," she murmured. "This is war." But even as she pieced the betrayal together, a question haunted her. Why would a woman do this to the man she married? Was it greed? Revenge? Or something darker? Something twisted by love turned into power? The answer didn't come. Not yet. But one thing was clear. If Chioma thought the world had forgotten what she'd done, she had underestimated the one lawyer too stubborn to walk away. The prison visitation room was quieter this time. No guards lingered. No reporters loitered by the gate. Just Darian, shackled again, his eyes hollow as usual, but watching her. Something had shifted between them, even if he didn't speak it. Adana took her seat and pulled out a file. "You signed over 78% of your company's shares to Chioma 3 weeks before your arrest." Why? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the wall, as if trying to remember the exact moment he lost everything. "Because I thought she was protecting me," he said at last, his voice barely audible. "There were rumors that the EFCC was watching us. Chioma said they'd target the family name if everything was still under me. She said I should let her hold things temporarily. I didn't even think twice." Adana's lips parted slightly. "You trusted her that much?" His eyes darkened. "I trusted her with my breath." Then came the part that tore into her. He described the night they came to arrest him. The way Chioma cried and screamed at the officers, how she begged them to take it easy on him, how she kissed his forehead before he was thrown into a van. But what haunted him, what broke his spirit, was that exact kiss. "Because she already knew I wasn't coming back," he said. That was the kiss of a woman burying her husband alive. Adana gripped the pen in her hand so tightly it snapped. This wasn't just betrayal. It was performance. Execution. The work of a woman who knew how to make love look like loyalty while slipping poison into his veins. Darian, once a man who made heads of state wait for his signature, now sat shackled, discarded. And still, Adana saw a flicker of something in him. Not anger, not revenge, but mourning. "You still love her," she whispered. He didn't deny it. And in that moment, Adana realized the most dangerous prison Darian was in wasn't the one with bars. After the visit, Adana sat in her car for nearly an hour, watching the sun set. She wanted to scream, not just because of the injustice, but because of how painfully familiar it all felt. She had watched her mother cry for years over the man she lost to the system. Now she was watching a man cry for the woman who sold him to it. And yet, Adana knew she couldn't walk away. Not now. Not after seeing the crack behind Darian's silence. He didn't need a lawyer. He needed someone to believe in him louder than the world condemned him. And for some reason she didn't yet understand, she wanted to be that voice. The knock on her door was soft but deliberate. It was 8:45 p.m., and Adana had just returned home after another long day in court and traffic. She opened the gate cautiously, only to freeze. Standing on the porch, draped in a sleek red gown and clutching a purse worth more than Adana's monthly income, was Chioma Okonkwo. The woman's makeup was flawless, lips painted in the shade of blood. "You shouldn't waste your career on him," she said smoothly. "He's broken. Useless. You can't save a man who's already dug his grave." Adana didn't respond. She just stepped aside slowly, but Chioma didn't enter. Instead, she pulled out a small white envelope. "Call this number. Walk away. I'll make it worth your while." The message was clear. Drop the case. Save your life. But Adana didn't reach for the envelope. She stared directly into the woman's eyes. "If you were so sure he was guilty, you wouldn't be standing here." Chioma's mask slipped for a millisecond. Just a blink. But in that blink, Adana saw something raw. Rage? Fear? She couldn't tell. Then Chioma smiled, icy and slow. "Don't say I didn't warn you." And just like that, she walked away. The next day, Adana's mother collapsed. The pharmacist said her medication hadn't been restocked in over a week. She had ordered it. The supplier said it was paid for. But the vials were gone. The entire shipment vanished. "Maybe a delivery mistake," the manager shrugged. But Adana knew better. She stood by her mother's bedside that night, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "You're not even on the battlefield yet," Chioma had said. And she was right. The war hadn't started in court. It had started in shadows. Her mother moaned in her sleep, her breath uneven, and Adana clenched her fists so tightly her knuckles turned white. This case was no longer about Darian. It was about power. About a woman who thought money could silence every mouth, including hers. But Adana wasn't raised to be silenced. She returned to her office the next day with eyes that hadn't slept. Her team stared, Kamsi, Ifani, even the janitor who greeted her each morning. Something in her aura had changed. She placed the envelope Chioma had given her on the table, unopened. "Let this be a symbol," she said aloud, "of what happens when someone tries to buy a conscience." She picked up her recorder and began dictating a new motion for subpoena. If Chioma wanted war, she'd get it. But this time, the battlefield wasn't a boardroom. It was truth. And truth had a lawyer now. A poor one. A tired one. But a dangerous one. The house was hidden behind rusted gates and surrounded by wild bush, the kind of place meant to be forgotten. It took Adana nearly 2 weeks, multiple bribes, and a false identity to find it. Inside, the former housemaid Amarachi shuffled across cracked tiles with the haunted eyes of someone who had seen too much and spoken too little for too long. She looked nothing like the confident witness Chioma had paraded during Darian's trial. Her skin was pale, her voice hoarse, and she trembled at every knock. "I wasn't supposed to talk to anyone again," she whispered, refusing to look Adana in the eye. "They said if I ever mentioned what I saw, I'd disappear, like Madame's driver." Adana's spine tingled. No one had spoken of a driver. Amarachi went on to describe a chilling night, the same night Darian was arrested, when Chioma held a private meeting with Obina, instructing her staff to stay out of sight. "She told me to say I heard screams. But I didn't. I just saw her drag Oga's unconscious body out of the bathroom and pour wine on his shirt. She told me to shut up and gave me 800,000 Nigerian nairas to leave Lagos." Amarachi's lips trembled as she spoke. "I was young. My mother needed surgery. I thought I was saving her, but I buried him instead." Adana sat back, blood draining from her face. This was it, the crack in the concrete wall of lies that could bring the entire story crumbling down. But Amarachi was terrified, constantly looking out the window, clutching a worn rosary with shaking fingers. "I can't go to court," she said repeatedly. "They'll kill me. They're watching. They always are." The woman was broken, shattered into pieces by guilt and fear. But Adana couldn't afford sympathy. She needed a witness. A voice. Someone who could start pulling back the veil Chioma had so elegantly stitched around her lies. "We'll protect you," Adana promised. "I'll file for witness protection under emergency judiciary protocol. You won't have to see her. You'll testify in private chambers." Amarachi hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Only if my face is hidden." please." Adana agreed. She had no choice. This was the beginning. A fragile, flickering candle in a cave full of darkness. But it was something. And something was more than Darian had ever been given. That night, Adana couldn't sleep. She lay on the floor beside her mother's bed, scrolling through trial transcripts, rereading Amarachi's testimony from the original case. It had been perfect. Too perfect. Every line scripted. Every emotion rehearsed. It was no wonder the judge had believed it. Chioma had made sure the lie was delivered like a performance at a theater. Adana looked at the ceiling and let tears slip down her cheeks. Not because she was overwhelmed, but because she was enraged. Not just at Chioma, but at the entire system. The media that sold the story without investigating, the prosecutors that didn't dig deeper, the lawyers who walked away because the truth was inconvenient. This wasn't just about one man anymore. It was about how easy it was to destroy someone with a beautiful lie. And now, Adana had the burden and the weapon to tell the ugly truth. The judge's chambers were dimly lit, with leather-bound walls and air that smelled of old documents and older egos. Adana stood before the panel of justices, her voice steady despite the hammering in her chest. Beside her, hidden behind a divider with her face obscured, Amarachi sat with trembling hands, her voice clear but low as she recounted everything. The room was so still you could hear paper breathing. When she finished, there was silence. A long, heavy silence. Then the presiding judge, Justice Yafat, leaned forward. "Why now?" he asked. Amarachi's voice cracked. "Because I've carried this lie like a tumor. It's killing me." The judge sat back, folded his hands, and declared that the court had grounds to consider reopening Darian Okonkwo's trial. The word retrial sent a jolt through Adana's body. She bowed slightly, holding back the scream that wanted to leap from her chest. This was it. The door had opened, just a crack. But it was enough for justice to slip its foot in. By the time Adana stepped outside, her phone was already ringing. News outlets had caught wind of the filing. Breaking: ex-billionaire Darian Okonkwo may face retrial after new testimony. She was swarmed by questions, cameras flashing, microphones shoved in her face. Are you saying Chioma Okonkwo lied? Is this about money? Are you defending an abuser? Adana stood tall, her voice firm. We are defending the Constitution and the right of every man and woman to a fair trial. No more, no less. Behind the cameras, her colleague Ifani grinned. You just went viral, he said. But Adana didn't smile. She wasn't doing this for likes. She was doing it because if this lie could be broken, maybe her father's death wouldn't be in vain. Maybe justice wasn't a ghost after all. But the celebration didn't last. By that evening, Chioma had released a press statement through her attorney. She called the retrial a disgraceful circus orchestrated by desperate opportunists. She claimed Darian was manipulating women to rewrite history. The media, ever hungry for drama, split into factions. Hashtags exploded. Hashtag Justice for Chioma versus hashtag Free Darian Now. Adana's social media inbox was flooded with threats and vile insults. But what hurt more was the email from her landlord. Please vacate your office within 14 days. This building can't risk the publicity. Kamsi cursed under her breath when she heard. They're coming for you hard. Adana nodded, staring at the walls of her small office. Let them come, she whispered. I've been through worse storms. And I'm still here. Because this time, she wasn't just fighting for Darian. She was fighting for every person who had been crushed beneath the lie of a smiling face. The blow came so fast she didn't see it. One moment she was locking up her office, the next she was on the ground, her head ringing as boots thudded around her. A fist collided with her ribs, another with her jaw. Her scream was swallowed by the darkness as two masked figures kicked her again and again. Stay out of what doesn't concern you, one hissed. Then they were gone. Silence, except for the rain that had just begun to fall, mixing with the blood pooling at her lips. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone. The screen was cracked, but she managed to dial. She didn't even know what she said before everything went black. The next time she opened her eyes, she was in a hospital bed, surrounded by beeping monitors and Kamsi's panicked face. "You almost died," Kamsi whispered, tears streaming. "They wanted to end this case. End you." Adana didn't speak. She couldn't. But she knew something now. Chioma was no longer hiding behind courtrooms. She was using fists. But the damage didn't stop there. Days later, Adana was hit with a notice from the Nigerian Bar Association. She had been reported for witness manipulation and unethical interference. The complaint cited her questionable relationship with Darian Okonkwo and suggested she had coerced Amarachi. It was pure fiction, but crafted so expertly that it took root. The timing was perfect, right after the media frenzy. Someone, somewhere, had pulled legal strings to slow her down. "They're trying to disbar you," Kamsi said, pacing. "This is war." Adana, bruised and bandaged, sat upright. "Then let me fight like a soldier." She filed an official defense, her voice hoarse as she presented evidence of Amarachi's voluntary testimony. Legal procedures followed, and the threat she received from Chioma herself. But she knew it wouldn't matter. Not in a system that liked its lawyers clean, quiet, and obedient. Later that night, Darian requested to see her. He had heard of the attack and the charges. He looked at her differently now, not with pity, but with something like pain. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "They've hurt you like they hurt me. But you didn't have to get involved." Adana looked him dead in the eye. "Because you're not the only one who's been destroyed by a lie." The room was silent for a long time. Then, slowly, Darian reached for her hand. Not in romance, not in apology, but in shared survival. Two broken people, one framed, one forgotten, both learning that justice doesn't rise on its own. It has to be dragged bleeding through the streets before it ever reaches the courtroom doors. The email came at 3:12 a.m. Adana had been sleeping on the office couch, her body still aching from the attack, when her phone buzzed. The subject line was simple: "I know the truth." Attached was a link to a secure folder and a message. "We all knew she lied. I kept something, but I was afraid. Not anymore. If anything happens to me, let this speak for me." It was signed by one Kelechi MBA, a name Adana vaguely remembered from Darian's company as a junior tech officer. Her fingers trembled as she opened the folder. The first file was grainy CCTV footage, time-stamped from the night Darian was arrested. The camera had clearly been hidden, maybe even unauthorized, but it captured everything. Chioma dragging a passed-out Darian down the hallway, whispering to someone on the phone. She placed a wine bottle beside him, spilled some across his shirt, and positioned a broken glass nearby. The video had no sound, but the orchestration was clear. This wasn't a woman escaping abuse. This was a woman directing a scene like a script. Adana watched the video over and over again, bile rising in her throat. This wasn't just evidence. This was devastation, the kind that shattered narratives and rewrote history. She immediately called Kelechi, and after several attempts, he finally answered, his voice shaking. "They tried to fire me that night," he said. "But I saved the footage on a hidden server before wiping the system. I thought if I ever got caught, it would at least save my life." He paused. "But when I saw how they hurt you, I knew I couldn't be a coward anymore." Adana thanked him and promised witness protection. She knew what this meant. It was no longer her word against Chioma's or even Amarachi's. Now, she had visual proof of fabrication, intentional, malicious, and deeply incriminating. But she also knew this video, if not handled properly, could disappear before ever reaching court. It was the kind of truth powerful people buried with money, silence, or blood. She didn't sleep that night. She backed up the footage on 5 different hard drives, locked one in a bank vault, gave another to Kamsi, uploaded one to a cloud drive under a pseudonym, and sent a time-delayed email to the presiding judge's clerk. When she finally looked in the mirror the next morning, she looked like a woman possessed, eyes bloodshot, lips cracked, hair undone. But beneath the exhaustion was something new: clarity. Chioma had played with fire and painted herself as the victim. But now the fire was coming for her. The next hearing was 3 days away. Adana drafted a motion to submit new digital evidence and walked it in herself, watching the clerk's eyes widen. "Is this real?" he whispered. "You have no idea," she replied. As she left, she saw Chioma's lawyer across the hallway. He looked smug, untouched. She smirked to herself. Let him smile, she thought. He hasn't seen what I'm about to burn down. The courtroom was so packed it felt like a public execution. Journalists lined the rear pews, social media influencers had taken over the left wing, and Darian himself had been allowed to appear in person for the first time since his conviction. His handcuffs were still on, but his eyes looked alive, an ember flickering again, no longer dead. Adana stood beside him, her files neat, her robe ironed, but her nerves were fire under her skin. The judge entered, voices hushed, and the proceedings began. The prosecutor repeated the usual charges with mechanical indifference. Then Adana stood, her voice calm but cutting. "Your Honor, the defense would like to submit newly surfaced video footage that directly contradicts the prosecution's foundation of truth." The room stirred. The judge raised an eyebrow. "On what grounds?" Adana lifted the file. "On the grounds that Mrs. Chioma Okonkwo orchestrated a crime scene to frame her husband, and we have video evidence." A gasp swept the gallery like a gust of wind through dry leaves. The footage played. Silence fell like thunder. Every frame told a new story. One that shattered Chioma's credibility. One that cut through her carefully curated media image. Even Chioma's lawyer, once smug, now fumbled with his briefcase. The judge paused the video midway and stared at Adana. "Is there proof this footage is authentic?" Adana handed over Kelechi's sworn affidavit and the original file's data trail. "Digital forensics can verify. My witness is also prepared to testify." There was no need. The courtroom had already seen what it wasn't supposed to see. Truth, raw and violent, had leapt from the screen and left no room for doubt. Chioma wasn't a victim. She was a master manipulator. Darian, once crucified by her words, now looked like a man waking up from a nightmare he didn't know how to end. The judge called for a recess. Outside, reporters surrounded Adana, thrusting microphones into her face. "Is this the turning point? Did you always believe Darian was innocent? Are you and your client romantically involved?" The last question stung more than it should have. Adana pushed past them, her heart still racing, not from adrenaline, but from rage. Rage at how easily the narrative had been accepted for so long. Rage at how many people had looked at Chioma's tears and seen justice instead of performance. Darian sat in a holding room, staring at the floor. "Thank you," he said without looking up. Adana didn't answer. She just nodded and left the room, not because she didn't want to stay, but because the fight wasn't over. The system had shown it could be blind. Now it needed to be forced to see again. The fire didn't take long to find her. The day after court, Adana woke up to chaos. Her name was trending again, but not in celebration. Screenshots of fabricated love letters between her and Darian flooded the internet. In the letters, Adana described how she would do anything to get him out, even if it means lying in court. The tone was dramatic, filled with phrases no real lawyer would ever write. But it didn't matter. The media didn't care about handwriting analysis or inconsistencies in timestamps. They saw scandal, and scandal fed their clicks. "Defense lawyer caught in romantic plot with billionaire client." One headline read. Her inbox was flooded with hate. Her mother's clinic was surrounded by press. Her license was now officially under review by the Nigerian Bar Association. Kamsi was livid. "This is dirty. It's a trap. She's framing you now." Adana sat silent, holding the forged letters in shaking hands. Whoever had written them had studied her writing style, even mimicked her tone. She knew where it came from. Someone with access to Darian's prison correspondence. Someone Chioma had paid. Adana's instinct was to scream, to tear it all apart, but she didn't. Instead, she got up, put on a robe, and walked into the fire. At a press briefing that evening, she addressed the lies head-on. "These letters are fraudulent. I have never had any romantic relationship with my client. I am being targeted for doing my job and for getting too close to the truth." Some believed her, some didn't, but her voice was calm. her words deliberate. And that was enough to keep her above water. Barely. The damage, however, was done. Some of her smaller clients pulled out. A local church that once supported her charity cut ties. She lost her pro bono sponsorships. Even her alma mater revoked an upcoming alumni award she was meant to receive. Reputation matters, they said in a terse email. Adana laughed bitterly when she read it. It matters more than truth, she muttered. Darian, hearing of the latest attack, asked to see her again. This time, there was no distance between them. I'm sorry, he said quietly. This is all because of me. Adana looked at him, her eyes red, her hands trembling. No, she replied. It's because of her. And now I understand something. Darian tilted his head. What? Adana stood slowly, her voice like steel. Chioma isn't fighting to prove her innocence. She's fighting to bury ours. That night, she didn't go home. She went back to the office, dimmed the lights, and sat beside the file cabinet. She stared at Chioma's wedding photos. Let's see what happens when a liar runs out of lies. The man waiting for her at the rooftop bar of Eden Heights didn't look like a traitor. Dressed in a cream senator outfit with gold wrist beads and an expensive cologne that lingered too long, Obinna Ojukwu looked every inch the polished CEO he had become. His smile was faint, his glass of scotch barely touched. I don't have long, he said as Adana took a seat opposite him. Chioma has eyes everywhere. Adana said nothing. She pulled out her recorder, placed it on the table, and pushed it forward. Obinna laughed. You always were the dramatic one. But when his eyes met hers, there was something brittle behind them. Fear, guilt, or both. She's out of control, he began, voice low. I never meant for it to go this far. It was supposed to be a silent takeover, not a character assassination. He looked away. Chioma said she just needed time to transfer shares, that Darian would forgive us eventually. Adana blinked. Forgive us. So he had been part of it. He wasn't just the beneficiary. He was an architect of betrayal. Obinna continued, fingers tightening around his glass. But then she changed. She started spinning stories, said if we didn't destroy him completely, he might come back. That he was a threat. His voice dropped further. She forged the rape report, bribed the nurse. She even got a corrupt police official to alter the timeline of the supposed domestic assault. He chuckled bitterly. All this, just so she could sit on the throne of his empire without ever earning it. Adana's pulse raced. This was it. The confirmation. The words that could burn Chioma's lies to the ground. But Obinna wasn't done. Now she's threatening to turn on me. She said if I don't stay quiet, she'll leak a recording that makes me look like I masterminded everything. He looked up, eyes glassy. I want immunity. In exchange, I'll testify. But I want out of the country. Out of this mess. Out of her reach. Adana hesitated. This man had helped ruin Darian. But he also held the final piece. The testimony that could make Chioma unravel in open court. If I give you this chance, she said slowly, you don't run. You show up. You speak. And you face him. Obinna nodded. Deal. As she left, her hands trembled. She had the matchstick in her hand now. One strike, and Chioma's empire of manipulation would go up in flames. But part of her felt cold. This man had destroyed a friend, wrecked an empire, and stood by as lies buried an innocent man alive. And now he wanted to walk away clean. It didn't sit right. Still, Adana recorded the statement, backed it up, and sent the immunity proposal to the Special Judicial Committee. Kamsi warned her, you're trusting a snake to kill a viper. But Adana shook her head. I'm not trusting him. I'm using him. That night, she slept for the first time in 3 days, knowing the case was finally turning. But by morning, everything had changed. The call came at 6:13 a.m. Obinna was dead, found in his home office, face down on his desk, with a half-empty whiskey bottle and a handwritten note. The police ruled it a suicide. Guilt, they said. He couldn't handle the pressure. But Adana didn't believe that for a second. She read the note 3 times. It didn't sound like a man confessing. It sounded like a man begging. Forgive me for what I couldn't fix. She's watching. She always is. I'm sorry. The pen had fallen beside it. The ink was smeared. His laptop, phone, and security camera footage were gone. Wiped. Chioma's reach had struck again. Clean. Fast. Merciless. Kamsi stormed into Adana's office minutes after the report broke, throwing a newspaper across the desk. They're calling it closure, she hissed. They're painting her as the victim again. Obina's suicide proves she was right. Adana's stomach churned. The public now saw Chioma as vindicated. The man who betrayed Darian had conveniently died with guilt, and the fragile truth Adana had finally unearthed was being buried once again, this time with a coffin and a funeral. But Adana knew what Chioma didn't. She had copies of Obina's testimony, his recorded confession, his timeline, names, bank transfers, even his fear. She hadn't released them yet, hoping to secure the immunity deal first. Now, she had no reason to wait. She sent the files to the prosecution and to the judge. By the end of the day, the court had agreed to allow the evidence into the case. But it didn't bring Adana joy. As she sat alone in her office that night, staring at the candle she always lit for her father, she whispered, "Another man dead, because someone didn't speak up soon enough." She closed her eyes and saw Obina's face. Weak. Regretful. Not a hero. But not the devil either. Somewhere in between. Caught in a woman's web, until he bled, trying to crawl out. She cried, not for him, but for the little justice he gave before death took him too. Darian sat quietly when she told him. He didn't ask for details. He just stared ahead. "I trusted him with my life," he said softly. "He gave a speech at my wedding." Adana nodded. "He helped tear your life apart," she added. Darian turned to her. And in the end she turned on him too. For the first time, Adana saw fire in his eyes. Not pain. Not sorrow. Rage. "She doesn't stop," he whispered. "She doesn't lose. Not unless someone makes her." He looked at her then, really looked. "You ready to make her lose, Adana?" She didn't answer. She just opened the case file and placed it between them. "Let's finish what we started." And in that moment, their war turned into something personal, no longer just about truth or even justice, but about every soul Chioma had crushed beneath her throne. They found the accountant in a rehabilitation center outside Owerri, paralyzed on one side, his voice slurred from a stroke that had nearly killed him a year prior. His name was Mr. Agbo, and once upon a time, he had been Darian's most loyal financial advisor. It took 3 weeks of digging to locate him, and another 2 days of persuading the center's director to grant Adana a private visit. When she entered the pale room, he looked at her through watery eyes. "You're the girl they say is risking her life for him," he muttered. She smiled gently. "I'm trying to save a man who was never given a chance." He chuckled. "Then you'll need this." With trembling fingers, he motioned to a drawer beside his wheelchair. Inside was a small flash drive, carefully sealed in a waterproof pouch. "Everything is in there," he said. "The accounts, the emails, her signature, her orders, the shell companies, the laundering, every dime she moved after he gave her control." He coughed hard, tears falling from his eyes. "She said she'd take care of everything. I didn't know she meant bury him alive." Back at the office, Adana and Kamsi examined the files. It was worse than they thought. Chioma hadn't just taken over the company. She'd rerouted funds into offshore accounts, created fake consulting firms, and authorized payments to fake vendors. Darian's name had been used on falsified invoices for crimes he never committed. There were even audio files, recordings of Chioma instructing the accountant on what to file, what to delete, and how to time everything to make Darian look like the embezzler. "If this isn't proof of intent," Kamsi muttered, "nothing is." They cried when they finished, not out of sadness, but out of exhaustion, out of the overwhelming weight of truth that had finally been placed in their hands. This wasn't just a defense case anymore. It was a rescue mission, for justice, for Darian's name, and for every woman who'd been accused of lying just because someone else had. Adana stood before the judge 2 days later, her voice clear and fearless. "Your Honor, I present irrefutable digital and audio evidence that proves a targeted conspiracy led by Mrs. Chioma Okonkwo to embezzle funds and frame her husband. The files include her voice giving explicit instructions, signed documents, and verified financial transactions. The courtroom held its breath. Chioma sat in silence, her lips twitching slightly, but her face unreadable. She hadn't expected this. Not now. Not from a girl with no wealth, no connections, and no mercy. The judge nodded. We will allow the evidence. The final trial will proceed. As Adana turned and walked out, every camera turned toward her. But she didn't pause. Because this wasn't her finish line. It was just the starting whistle. And Chioma Okonkwo was finally going to stand trial for every lie she ever weaponized. The air in the courtroom felt like iron. Heavy, unmoving, and suffocating. Crowds spilled into the gallery, media vans parked outside like vultures, and security doubled. It wasn't just a trial anymore. It was a national event. Former investors, ex-employees, women's groups, and even political officials were watching. On one side sat Adana, her eyes sharp, her files neatly arranged. On the other side sat Chioma Okonkwo, draped in a stunning white blouse with gold earrings, her eyes cold, unbothered. Darian sat in the center, no longer handcuffed, wearing a clean suit for the first time in 3 years. He didn't speak. He didn't move. But his presence alone was thunder. Justice Yufat entered, and silence fell. We are gathered to hear the case of Darian Okonkwo versus the state, in light of new evidence submitted against Mrs. Chioma Okonkwo. All rise. What followed was not just a court hearing, it was a reckoning. Adana called her first witness, Kelechi, the former tech assistant. His hands trembled slightly as he confirmed the authenticity of the footage and explained how he hid it out of fear. Then came Amarachi, behind a curtain, voice modulated. She recounted the night of the staged crime scene, this time not with tears, but with fire. Then came the accountant's files. Adana played the audio recordings in the courtroom, each line from Chioma echoing like a hammer to a wall. Just change the name. I'll sign it myself. No one will check those vendor accounts. If Darian ever finds out, he won't live to see court. The gallery gasped. Even the judge shifted in his seat. Adana's final move was a slideshow of forensic tracing, bank accounts, voice prints, contracts, and a forensic expert who verified every single document's legitimacy. It was ironclad, bulletproof, devastating. Then she rested her case, her voice clear. This was never just about love gone wrong. This was theft, betrayal, and attempted murder, masked with perfume and makeup. Chioma took the stand. Her voice was still calm. Her expression still soft. She blamed it all on trauma, on being overwhelmed, on protecting herself from a violent man. But Adana pounced with precision. Where are the receipts for the abuse treatment centers you claimed you visited? Silence. Why did your driver and maid flee Lagos the same week Darian was arrested? Silence. Why did Obinna Ojukwu die days after offering to testify? Chioma flinched. Do you deny that this is your voice in these audio files? Adana clicked play. The courtroom filled with Chioma's own words. Manipulative, commanding, cruel. At last, Chioma snapped. Her face twisted, voice rising. You all believe him. You always did. He thought he could cheat on me and leave me with nothing. I gave him everything. The court roared. The judge banged his gavel. But the damage was done. Her mask had cracked. And the real Chioma, the one who destroyed a man and painted herself a saint, stood exposed for the world to see. The days that followed were tense. The final judgment was scheduled for Friday morning, and Lagos held its breath. Billboards changed. Headlines shifted from billionaire monster to framed husband. Talk shows rehashed everything. Even the court staff spoke in hushed tones about what they'd seen unfold. Darian remained silent, rarely speaking, spending most of his time staring out the barred windows. What if they still find me guilty? He asked Adana one evening. She looked up from her notes. Then we appeal again, and again, until truth wins. Or we die trying. Her words weren't meant to comfort. They were a vow, a pact sealed by two souls crushed by the same corrupt system. On the day of judgment, they walked into court side by side. Darian in a charcoal gray suit, Adana in her full robe, her braid tied in a low bun, eyes blazing with quiet power. The judge cleared his throat and began to read. In light of overwhelming new evidence, the words were slow, measured, yet irreversible. The court finds that the original judgment against Mr. Darian Okonkwo was based on falsified testimony, fraudulent documentation, and intentional misconduct. Adana's breath caught. She squeezed Darian's arm. This court hereby overturns the conviction and declares Mr. Okonkwo innocent of all charges. The room erupted. Journalists dropped pens. People screamed. Chioma stood slowly, hands trembling, as officers stepped toward her. Furthermore, this court issues a warrant for the immediate arrest and prosecution of Mrs. Chioma Okonkwo for perjury, criminal conspiracy, and attempted financial fraud. Chioma's scream echoed as she was handcuffed. "You fools! He deserves to rot. I made him. I gave him life." Darian watched, quiet. Then, as she passed by, he whispered, "You buried me, Chioma. But you forgot I was a seed." Outside, the sky cracked with thunder, and rain began to fall, a soft, cleansing downpour. The press surrounded them instantly. "Mr. Okonkwo, how does it feel to be free?" Darian looked at Adana. "Ask her," he said. "She gave me my life back." Cameras turned to her. "Miss Irowanya, what will you do now?" Adana smiled faintly. "Rest. And then, I'll fight again." As they made their way down the courthouse steps, a child ran up to Darian and hugged his leg. "My daddy said you're a hero." Darian bent down and lifted the boy gently. "Your daddy's right." But even in that moment of vindication, Adana knew this wasn't the end. Chioma had fallen, yes. But systems like the one that let her thrive, they were still alive. And so was the fire in her. Returning to the house that once bore his name felt like walking through a ghost town. Darian stood in the doorway of his Ikoyi estate, his footsteps echoing on cold marble. The furniture had been changed. His favorite wall art gone. Even the scent of the air was different, sterile, unfamiliar. Chioma had erased him even from here. Adana stood beside him, quiet, letting him move through each room in silence. In the study, he paused. "This was where she first kissed me," he said softly. "Now it feels like it never happened." Adana placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "She tried to rewrite your life. But you still own your story." He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You saved me. Twice, first from prison, then from believing I deserve it." She looked away, suddenly shy. "I didn't do it for thanks." "I know," he replied. "That's why it means everything." Later that evening, Darian called a press conference. Not in a grand ballroom, not with paid media handlers. Just a small podium on his front lawn, where he stood before the world and said, "I was wronged. Not just by a woman, but by silence. By a system that chose a beautiful lie over an uncomfortable truth. But I'm not here to dwell on what I lost. I'm here to help others find what I found, justice." He then announced the launch of the Redemption Foundation, a legal support fund for wrongly accused Nigerians. "My first partner," he said, pausing with a smile, "is the woman who proved the impossible." He turned, reaching for Adana's hand, and drew her to the podium. "This is Adana Irowanya. Without her, I'd be forgotten. Now, I'll spend the rest of my life making sure people like me are remembered." The crowd applauded, but Adana barely heard it. All she saw was Darian, free, standing tall, and looking at her like she was more than just his lawyer. That night, as the house grew quiet and the staff retired, Adana stood on the balcony, staring at the Lagos skyline. Darian joined her, 2 glasses of Zobo in hand. "No champagne," she teased. "Never again," he laughed. "Zobo's sweeter anyway." They stood in silence for a moment, the city lights blinking like distant promises. "I lost everything," he said quietly. "And I gained something I didn't know I needed." She looked at him. "What's that?" He turned, his eyes warm, voice barely above a whisper. "You." There was no kiss, no fireworks, just the quiet understanding of 2 people who had walked through hell and chosen to rebuild from the ashes, together. And in that silence, something tender and real bloomed. A new kind of love, not born of fantasy, but forged in fire. 6 months later, the once quiet office above a mechanic's shop in Yaba had transformed. Gone were the peeling walls and flickering fan. In their place stood a newly renovated glass-walled legal clinic, the Redemption Foundation, complete with 4 conference rooms, 2 full-time paralegals, and a growing team of volunteer attorneys. At the front of it all stood Adana, no longer just a poor girl lawyer, but now a national symbol of grit and justice. Behind her was Darian, often working quietly in the background, signing checks, attending reform meetings, and mentoring young ex-cons who'd been freed thanks to their work. But Adana remained the soul of the mission. Every morning, she walked in with her mother's old briefcase as a reminder of where she started. This, she told an intern one day, isn't a firm. It's a battlefield. And every case file is a sword. Her name was on every banner, but her heart still beat for the nameless. Cases poured in, young men framed by cult accusations, women wrongfully imprisoned for domestic violence, children arrested for crimes committed by their guardians. Adana fought each one like it was personal, because it was. The foundation began partnering with universities, hosting legal boot camps in rural areas. Darian oversaw the outreach department, now in charge of dispersing grants for post-incarceration support. But behind the smiles and media attention, there was still fire, burning quietly between him and Adana. They never labeled it, never rushed it, but everyone around them felt it. The stolen glances, the way Darian's hand lingered a second too long on her back during a speech, the way Adana's eyes found his in every crowd. It was a bond forged not in romance, but in war, nurtured slowly into something deeper, something unshakable. One evening, after a long day in court, Adana returned to the foundation to find Darian sitting alone in her office, flipping through an old photograph, his wedding photo. Chioma's face had been torn out. "You ever think about her?" she asked, gently closing the door behind her. "Every day," he said honestly, "but not with love, with warning. She reminds me what silence can cost." Adana sat beside him. "Do you regret loving her?" He paused, then shook his head. "I regret trusting the wrong version of her. But that's how lies work. They wear the skin of love until they rot you from the inside." He turned to her. "You showed me what truth feels like, even when it hurts, even when it costs everything." She smiled softly, her hand finding his. "And you showed me what fighting looks like, not for fame, but for the forgotten." No kiss followed, no swelling music, just 2 warriors holding hands in the aftermath of a war neither of them started, but both of them won. The cemetery was quiet. Birds chirped in the distance, the earth still damp from an early morning rain. Adana stood before a simple marble tombstone that read, "Justice Iroanya, 1947 to 2008. He believed in the law, even when the law forgot him." Beside her stood Darian, in a simple white shirt, his hand wrapped gently around hers. "I promised myself I'd bring something back to him," Adana said softly, kneeling to place a single white rose at the grave's edge. "Not wealth, not power, just truth." Her voice trembled. "They tried to bury justice, Papa, but they didn't know it was a seed." She stood slowly, brushing her palms on her gown. Darian pulled her into a gentle embrace. "He'd be proud, not just of what you've done, but of who you've become." She closed her eyes, resting her head against his chest. "So would your younger self," she whispered. "The boy who thought love was loyalty, and learned that loyalty isn't love unless it costs something." They stood there in silence, 2 survivors, 2 storytellers, 2 warriors, now at peace. As they walked back to the car, Darian paused, looking out across the small hilltop. "I want to marry you," he said suddenly. Adana stopped. She turned slowly, heart thudding. "Because you feel like you owe me?" He shook his head. "Because I don't. Because I finally know who I am without guilt. And you're the first person I want to share that with every day." She stepped closer. "No rings. No ceremonies. Not yet. Just a promise that we'll keep fighting side by side." He smiled. "Then I promise." They sealed it with a forehead touch, no crowds, no witnesses. Just the wind, the sky, and the silent blessing of a man buried beneath their feet, whose death had once broken her, and now gave her wings. Back at the foundation that afternoon, a new client walked in, a young girl falsely accused of shoplifting, bruises on her face, silence in her eyes. Adana leaned forward, voice calm and familiar. "My name is Adana Iroanya. Tell me everything they said you did, and I'll show them who you really are." In another room, Darian filed grant approvals for inmates who had just been released. Outside, the sun dipped behind the clouds, casting golden light across the building's glass. Justice had finally come, not in thunder, not in applause, but in the quiet footsteps of a woman who once walked into a courtroom with nothing and walked out having changed everything. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel TOCHI Stories for more.